To this might be added, as a farther demonstration of the inevidence of this point, even to the Romanists themselves, those secret checks which they meet with from their own consciences in the assertion of this supposed infallibility, discovered by their haltings and corrections, and tergiversations, and self-contradictions in explication of this new phenomenon. For however Mr. Cressy mounts this infallibility so high that it must not yield to Scripture itself, yet both himself elsewhere and their other authors everywhere are contented with a far lower proportion. Bellarmine, whom Mr. Cressy writes and approves, in his comparison of the infallibility of the Church and Scripture, gives the preeminence to Scripture in 5 several respects. Truth and our obligation to believe it is in a higher degree in Scripture than in the decisions of the Church. Cressy, Appendix, Chapter 5, N. 2. And this infallibility of the Church, though they will not suffer us to call it human and moral, yet they dare not assert it to be divine, but only after a sort, and in some manner divine, as the author of Laud's Labyrinth informs us. And this infallibility, they farther confess, is not in way of immediate revelation or inspiration from God, but in the way of argumentation and discourse. And here, too, they are wonderful cautious. For it is acknowledged by Bellarmine and Stapleton, and subscribed by Mr. Cressy, that the Church is fallible in the premises, but infallible in the conclusion. In the decisions of the Church, the simple conclusion decided is only accounted infallibly true, not so the principles upon which it depends, or reasons by which it is proved. Cressy, Uba Supra, Section 2, Chapter 32, as well as Appendix, Chapter 5. Really, these Romish priests are admirable fellows in all things, admirable builders. Vitruvius himself might learn architecture from them, for they can teach him how to build a solid and durable edifice upon a rotten foundation. Admirable logicians, Aristotle might go to school to them, and learn such lessons as were above his apprehension, for it is resolved he must blot out his axioms, conclusio sequitur partum debiliorum, and non debet esse plus in conclusium quam in premissis, and ex fallis nil nisi falsum. The College of Jesuits at Rome are ready to make good the contrary against him, when Plato's great year shall bring him and them together upon the stage. Admirable divines, they have outdone their Lord and Master, and in spite of whatsoever is laid by him, Luke 6, verse 43 and 44, will, if he please, maintain a dispute with him upon this thesis, that a corrupt tree can bring forth good fruit, and that of thorns men may gather figs, and of a bramble bush grapes. And this shall be not probably defended, but infallibly demonstrated. For it were a silly thing to think that they that are infallible divines should be but fallible disputants. But to return, the inevidence of this notion of the Church's infallibility may sufficiently appear from Mr. Cressy's own expressions, which have been observed by others, who by the evidence of the truth was forced to this acknowledgment, that infallibility is an unfortunate word, that Mr. Chillingworth had combated it with too great success, so that I could wish, saith he, the word were forgotten, or at least laid by. Whereas all that understand anything know that it was not the word, but the thing which he combated, and his arguments were not nominal against the title, but real against the thing itself. It is true, since this passage was published and taken notice of, Mr. Cressy, having doubtless been severely schooled by his superiors for such a dangerous passage, is grown more cautious, and hath stretched his wit, and I fear his conscience too, to palliate his assertion, and make an honorable retreat. And he honestly acquaints us with his design, that is, being crafty to catch the Protestants with guile, Section 2, Chapter 21. He that reads the Appendix to the second edition of his Exomologesis will easily discern the trepidations of a guilty conscience, whilst sometimes you shall find him tacitly denying the Church's infallibility, properly so called, and contenting himself with great probability in the room of it. At other times you will meet him crying up this infallibility in express or equivalent terms, and in most places having no salvo for himself but this: that his assertion and the Protestants' disputation did proceed upon the mistaken notion of infallibility, that the Protestants advanced to an higher pitch than ever the Church of Rome did, and so fought against an image that themselves had set up, which is so notorious a falsehood, that if Mr. Cressy's wit and memory and conscience had not all failed him together, he could hardly have run into it, since all Protestants of any note ever did, and particularly Mr. Chillingworth, doth dispute against the Church's infallibility, only in that sense and degree which Mr. Cressy, upon maturest advice, in this second edition hath thought fit to express in these words: that God will preserve his Church in all truth, so as to secure all believers, that she can neither deceive them nor be deceived herself. Section 2, chapter 21. Did ever any Protestant that understood himself or the point pretend to more? Not Mr. Chillingworth, I am sure. They all knew and granted that absolute infallibility was God's prerogative, and neither pretended by the Church of Rome, nor was that opinion by Protestants fastened upon them. The only question was whether God had vouchsafed such infallible guidance to the Church that she could not err in her decrees and decisions. This Papists affirmed, and Protestants denied. And let me add that this infallibility is as high as was ever ascribed to the prophets or apostles and penmen of the Holy Scripture. And although their infallibility be said to be larger or greater, extensive, because in them it reached to all sentences and words and arguments, yet the Romanists themselves cannot say it is higher or greater intensive, and the articles of faith or conclusive decisions decreed by councils are in their opinion as infallible as the same are when they are laid down in the Scripture. This was the notion Mr. Chillingworth combated against, with so great success, as Cressy confesseth.